Hello and welcome back, and today I want to show you guys how to edit your professional photos and videos on a Synology NAS. And in today's video I've broken it down into 5 separate parts. Hopefully on the timeline you can see it below, but in this video, in part 1, I'm going to talk to you about pool volumes and shared folders. I'm assuming you've set up your NAS for the most part, but just in case we'll go through it. In part 2, I'm going to be going through network connectivity for those of you that are going to be using 10 GBE, some of the ideal ways to connect and indeed direct connect. Part 3, mapped drives. Part 4, iSCSI LANs and SAN connections for those of you that are using more advanced editing software where you need a little bit more privileges to access them. And finally, just a quick bit at the end about Synology Drive. So let's crack on with part 1 in this video. Now, I am using the DS723 Plus from Synology for this video. I'm using it because it has the option of a 10 GBE upgrade, but more on that later on. It's a 2-bay NAS, but periodically I will be looking at this, a 4-bay NAS known as the DS923. Why am I using 2 NASes? Well, it'll become a little bit clearer later on, but just so I can show you different scenarios. Now, to keep it nice and brief, nice and straightforward, the difference between volumes and pools. So a pool is the drives that you have got that you've combined together in that RAID. A RAID is a bunch of drives all put together so you can benefit from larger storage as well as factoring in something called redundancy, which is a safety net, where if one of your drives was to die, then because of redundancy in the way it writes on drives, you can still recover all of your data by installing a new drive there. Some users don't know that with certain RAID configurations where you have multiple drives, the more drives you have, the higher the performance you have. So often one of the reasons people recommend 4 bays and above for photo and video editing is because you get more performance by having more drives being read and written to simultaneously. So just bear that in mind. Also, some systems allow you to take advantage of SSD bays that are built inside the system to add much faster SSDs. Currently, at the time of recording, only the DS923 and the DS723 support these drives to be turned into a storage pool. So that's what pools are. What about volumes? Well, volumes are little containers that live on the storage pool of certain amount of size. So consequently, you can create a storage pool with all of those drives, all big massive storage pool together. But a volume, you can create multiple volumes. Each one of those volumes can be a different size, or you can do one giant container. But if you are going to be using your NAS maybe a bit for home multimedia, a bit for video editing, a bit for surveillance, and a bit for backups, you might want to create multiple volumes, create multiple volumes from within that storage pool, and then within that you could say I want to create a 50 gig volume, and this 50 gig volume is where my music's going to live. Whereas if you want to just use the NAS just for editing, you might want to create one giant storage volume there. It's really going to come down to you. So what about that last thing, shared folders? Well, shared folders are, unsurprisingly, folders that are shared. These are one of the ways in which you can create an area of storage on your system that is accessible locally with your video editing software. So shared folders generally are containers like normal folders here where all of your data lives, and you can use existing ones that have been created as you've been installing apps and uploading data, or you can go ahead, click create new shared folder, give it a name, new share 2, say where you want it to live. So if you created all of those multiple volumes earlier, you can choose which volume you want it to be in. So in my case, let's say new share 2, we're going to put that on volume 3. Then from there, click next. Say if you want it encrypted, so again that will generate a key, so if anyone steals the NAS they can't access it. Then whether you want to enable kind of internal checks periodically to check the health. I should also add earlier, if you use encryption, you download a key. If you lose that key, you lose access to the data. Also, encrypted data transmissions are a pinch slower, so bear that in mind. From there, you create that new shared folder. And this can be a shared folder which you can then choose for the individual users that have access to your NAS. You would have created some by default, but if you do want to create new users, go to the control panel up the top, and then from there you can go ahead and add more. But for now, let's go ahead and say that all of the users have got access to this. And there you go, I've created that new shared folder. So hopefully in section 1 you've learned the difference between a pool a volume, and a shared folder. All of these are terms you're going to have to learn for part 2, 3, and 4 in our series. So next, let's move over to network connections. Now, a number of you may be wondering, why am I suddenly talking about the network connections? You came to this video to learn about storage and how to edit files on your NAS. Well, getting this set up right will make all the difference, and therefore for most users it's incredibly important that you set your network up right. Now, at the moment, as you can see up the top, I'm connected locally, 192.168.1.206. I've also got a second connection here. This second connection, a completely different number from what you're seeing up there, is connected via 10 GBE or 10,000 megabits per second. Now that means I can access files and have the bandwidth 10 times faster than that of the connection I'm currently on. Let's open that up, of just 1,000 megabits per second. Now if you're editing photos, there's not too much of a difference, because most of the photos you're editing, even if you're a raw editor, are going to be in the megabytes, not gigabytes. But when you're editing video, the connection between you and the NAS is paramount, because if your connection isn't big enough, then when you're editing, your system will be lagged out by the speed between the NAS and your Mac or Windows system. So if you're editing video, it's recommended you use 10 GBE, but also you can use 10 GBE directly. So as you can see, the reason I've got 2 live connections here is because I'm actually connected to this NAS twice. I've got one connection going to the router in this office, and I have another connection directly connecting that NAS to my PC over 10 GBE. I've used a 10 GBE to Thunderbolt adapter, and you can see here I'm connected to this system on the status at 10 gigabits per second. Hopefully on screen you would have seen the graphics connecting this NAS and this PC, but you can literally connect the 10 GBE port on a NAS that has 10 GBE with your system if you choose. You don't have to use a router or a switch. Just remember, if you are going to directly connect, it will appear on this list here of available connections, and then it will also appear on the assistant manager there. And as you can see, the NAS is listed twice. 10 GBE is generally the one listed at 169 on the IP at the beginning, with most normal 1 GBE connections at 192. Also remember, when setting up a connection, to change the MTU, otherwise known as jumbo frames or jumbo packets, to 9,000. This opens up the bandwidth and the file packet management to a larger degree. So make sure you set that to 9,000 for 10 GBE. On your local PC or Mac system, head back into that network manager, as I've got here. Right click, go to Properties. From Properties, go to Configure, go to Advanced, go down to Jumbo Packet, and make sure that is also at 9,000. Then click OK. If you're on a Mac, the Mac network setup will be different, but the configuration option should still be in Properties and Information. Now, we've set up that 10G connection, and as you can see, now I've got 2 different access numbers for this window, 192 and 169. I can go ahead, enter that number there, and now I'm able to access this NAS via the faster 10 GBE connection and the 1 GBE connection. Another thing it's worth highlighting while I'm doing this is, if you want higher performance with a 10 GBE connection, it's recommended to make a static IP. So what is a static IP? Well, most connections on your router or switch around your home or business environment are set to DHCP, otherwise known as dynamic. What that means is their identity can change as they are connected or disconnected from the network. This allows your network to not become overexhausted by devices that are dead or not connected to it, such as Wi-Fi devices and more. But dynamic IPs traditionally aren't as fast as static IPs, so it's recommended to switch to a manual IP and fix it to a specific number. Do bear in mind, however, that if you forget this number, it can be problematic to re-access your NAS afterwards and will require you to find the NAS on the network assistant. It may state that you can't access it, and you'll have to connect to the drive and change its settings from here. Otherwise, fixing a manual IP will ensure a larger degree of performance between you and your NAS. But just remember, having a 10 GBE connection is most important, and having enough drives to bolster up the performance, because 10 GBE is a bandwidth. It's the pipe that you can use. You still need enough drives to increase the amount of water you can access in that pipe. That's the importance of network connection. And just remember, most photo editors can get away with 1 GBE, but video editors try to use 10 GBE. Next, let's talk about map network drives. Now, up to this point, you may be wondering why everything I've done up till now has been on the Synology and not on my local machine. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, there are a lot of different video editing tools out there. So for this video, I'm using standard Adobe here, or in Premiere, but I'm using 2020 version there. So I'm sure you've got the updated version, but for Premiere Elements, this is just going to be absolutely fine here. Now, when you are accessing media locally on your PC, when you've got your library of footage, when you're looking to find your existing project, or you're looking to add multimedia to your existing project, you go to Files and Folders, and then you would search, wouldn't you, or using your local file folder breadcrumb system, be it PC or Mac. However, you're trying to access the NAS, so the next thing we want to do is have all of the files and folders that are on our NAS here that we've created and added all of our data to. We want that to be accessible locally. Now, one of the two most popular ways to do that is called mapping a network drive. What that does is take that shared folder we created earlier, shared to, and then adds it to our list of available drives on our local operating system. Now, the easiest way to do that is like so. Open that Synology Assistant tool from earlier. This will be the tool you used when you were setting up the NAS for the first time. Next, right-click the NAS that you want to connect with. Now, remember when earlier on I talked you through the network connections. If you want to connect this mapped network drive and this shared folder on the NAS where all of your footage is going to live on the fastest possible connection of 10 GBE, make sure you're selecting the NAS that you want to connect on the right bandwidth. So in my case, I've got the 10 GBE NAS from earlier and the 1 GBE. As I want to show video, what I want to do is right click there and then select Map Network Drive. But again, if you're editing photos, you can go ahead and select the 1 GBE depending on the size of the photos you're using. Select Mapped Drive, and from here, if you've already authenticated, which I have, you'll be given the list of available drives for you to choose. There's that drive that we created earlier on, but for me, I'm going to select Multimedia and Virtual Images. Again, this is a folder that is on this NAS already as a shared folder. All I'm doing is making that drive now locally accessible. Click Next. Assign that drive a letter. In my case, I'm going to give it the letter U, and then click Next. Now the Multimedia and Virtual Images folder is now visible on my desktop. And if I head back into the Adobe program, then search my files and folders, now when I go into the list of available PCs and drives, there at the bottom is the Multimedia Virtual Images tool there, and it will allow me, if I wish, to access that folder and add some of the media that I've contained therein. As you can see, I can go ahead, select, if I choose, some of the photos and video that I've got inside there, such as episodes of a TV show, and then import them into my library just like that. And I can edit these files on the fly just like I would a normal drive, but with the benefit that I'm connected over 10 GBE. Now, it's worth highlighting, even though I'm able to add those drives, mapping network drives isn't the optimal way to run connecting with a NAS remotely. Why is that? Well, because there are some applications and tools that do not like communicating with mapped drives. Either the mapped drive will not be visible, as is the case in some video editing tools, or the speed you get won't be as good as if you were connecting to a similar drive scale on a local drive. For those instances, that's when we have to talk about creating iSCSI targets, LUN and SAN connections. Now, an iSCSI LUN is an area of storage that once you connect to it on your local PC or Mac system is far more likely to be considered as local storage. That is a drive that your system treats as if it's directly connected. I've got one LUN connected there. Now, I'm going to be showing you how to do this on a Windows system. Later on, Eddie will be showing you a Mac video much the same. But for now, I'm going to go ahead with the Windows one and then show you intermittently where things will be different on the Mac. So, much like before, we've got the storage area, but this time we head up and select the tool SAN Manager. SAN Manager, ignore that first message there, will allow you to create these areas, these buckets of storage that are a little bit like volumes, but the difference is that these are purely for remote level storage. They can be connected to with Windows or Mac systems as well as other third-party OS systems. First things first, we create an iSCSI. This is the pathway that we're going to connect to the NAS. Select Add, and then from there we give our target a name. Now, before we go any further, it's worth highlighting that this target is currently being configured using that 192, that 1 GBE connection. So if you're running a 10 GBE connection, try to configure it within the 10 GBE windows, as some default setup options will be configured based on the connected user. So again, if you are going to be connecting to the NAS via 10 GBE for your photo video editing, try to make sure that you do it in the 10 GBE portal window. I'm going to name this target Syn Target 10G. Again, you can enable CHAP, which is an authentication method which you can use, but it will depend on your own system. I'm going to leave it off, but if you need additional authentication, enable that feature. Then, after that, say that you do want to create a LUN, because right now we are creating the pathway to the NAS. What we want to do is create that new LUN. After this, we name our LUN, so I'm going to call this Syn LUN. Now, this is where something I mentioned earlier on at the beginning about storage volumes comes back into play. If you've created a specific volume that you want to use for editing, select it here. Alternatively, if you're using faster SSDs and you've created a pool with those and you want to make sure that those are the ones that your video editing or photo editing is going to take place on over iSCSI, select it there. Otherwise, select the hard drives. Just bear in mind that all of this will depend on how you configured it in the first place. Remember, if you need help on this, head over to my Synology NAS setup guide, where I will talk you through here, it's linked below, many steps on setting your Synology NAS up for the first time. Just make sure you select part 2 here, which tells you exactly how to set up individual storage areas, as well as the first part for configuring those initial storage pools. So do check those out. They're still very relevant, even though that video is coming up on a year to year and a half old. For me, I'm going to select the SSD volume. Then we're going to say the capacity. Now, obviously, the amount of storage we can assign here will depend on that storage container we selected earlier on. So I'm going to go ahead and assign us 150 gig of storage. Next, the provisioning. Now, depending on if you're going to make this area bigger or smaller over time, you need to decide. So thin provisioning allows you to state that any amount of storage space you want, and then over time, as you add more drives to your NAS, it can get to that size. Thick provisioning will give the better performance, but you have to pre-assign the storage in advance. I'm going to go for thick. Then after that, we click done, and it will go ahead and create both our 10 GBE pathway over iSCSI, and it will create the area of LUN storage, that 150 gig. However, we've only done the NAS side. Now we have to make it visible on our local side. And in order to do that, you need, in my case, an iSCSI Initiator. This is a tool that manages the connections between the connected Windows system and the remote level storage. Now, iSCSI Initiator is included in Microsoft Windows. However, if you're a Mac user, you are going to need additional SAN or iSCSI connection devices. Synology don't go out of their way to recommend one, but you can use KernSafe, which is a completely free one, or as semi-free ones such as Global iSCSI SAN Initiator. Again, you can try those out to connect with it for the first time, with most of the steps being largely the same as what I'm going to show you. But heading back to this one, for you Windows users, open up the iSCSI Initiator by just typing iSCSI into your Windows menu and then selecting iSCSI Initiator. From here, head into the Discovery tab. Then select Discover Portal. From here, enter the IP of that NAS. It's very important, if you're going to use the 10GBE, to apply the 10GBE connection. In my case, 169.2.254.159.129. Also, select Advanced and make sure to select the local iSCSI adapter. Click OK and then click OK. This will now add that iSCSI line, that connection pathway, to your list of available target portals. Then go into Targets. As you scroll down, you'll notice suddenly that one of these, because I have got lots of dead ones, you won't have all of this, but you will now have an entry on here for your NAS. As you can see, there is our iSCSI plus NAS target. If we scroll down, we've got other ones from other connections I've made. From there, select the one that's now become alive. In your case, you shouldn't have all of the others, and then click Connect. From here, make sure you select Multipath. Multipath now allows multiple connections, which will be far more beneficial to the NAS IP architecture. Click Advanced for two reasons. One, so again, make sure you're selecting the right iSCSI Initiator. Also, if you've got multiple IPs running on initiators, unlikely, you can make sure to select the correct one. And if you enabled CHAP during the original creation of your iSCSI LUN, use this time to enter that login information to make sure it can be authenticated. From there, click OK and then click OK again. The amount of time this will take to authenticate will differ depending on the level of your connection, but it should return you to this screen here. Now you're done with the iSCSI Initiator, you can come out of it there, and now, depending on whether you're a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 user, use the following steps. If you're on Windows 10, go to the This PC option and then select Manage. This will open up a new window known as Computer Management. If you're a Windows 11 user, just head to the bottom left and type in Computer Management, and it will find that as an available option, and selecting that will open this menu. Then double click Storage, then double click Disk Management, and you should be greeted by the option to add a brand new logical disk. Again, you can select OK. Make sure that GPT is selected, not MBR. Unless you're using that drive to boot anything, do not select that top option. Select OK. And then if we scroll down, we can now see that 150 gig or 1.49.98 gigabytes is visible. Right click, select New Simple Volume, then select Next. Don't change this, you won't need to. Give the drive a letter. So in this case, I'm going to give the letter L. Select Next. Give the drive a name. So this will be SSD SYN. It will ask it to perform a quick format, always recommended. Click Finish. And depending on, again, the speed of your connection and the size of the drive, it will now add this to your list of available drives. Once that's done, we'll be able to go into our PC, and whereas before we were able to see my logical drives and the multimedia drive that we connected as a mapped drive, as you can see, now the Synology is visible as the SYN drive here. And now we've got a new drive that we can add if we go back to our 2020 version of Premiere Elements. I keep forgetting whether it's Photoshop or not. I keep coming in and out of it. From there, we can go and add our new content onto that new database of footage and photos that we can add media here, files and folders. And again, this time we go back to the main list of drives, this PC. And as you can see now, we've got that Synology drive. We've got the Synology drive. We've also got that mapped drive, and now we've got those two lovely ways in which we can add all of the information on our NAS if we choose. We can interact with it and edit it with it locally without having to rely on the system having to connect remotely like it would if we were connecting it here using the proprietary tools. And that's really how to connect. Again, if you're a Mac user, there are iSCSI tools available, and Eddie will be making a Mac version shortly. However, moving away from this, I think we have to end this drive on a quick tool that Synology are always keen to talk about, that I do recommend for photo video editors, known as Synology Drive. Now, for those of you, particularly photo editors, that want to synchronize with the NAS and don't want to do any of the hard work stuff that I've just talked about, you may want to consider using Synology Drive. I wouldn't really recommend it for video editors for precise editing, but it's still a great tool to synchronize individual folders on the NAS for multiple team members that are all working on the same projects. So on the Synology, go ahead and install via the Application Center the following apps. You want to go down and find, or just go ahead and put the word drive in the top and install Synology Drive Server. Synology Drive Server will install the complement of Synology Drive applications. Now, the next thing you want to do is open up the Synology Drive Admin Console. From here, it will allow you in that team folder, all those shared folders you created earlier, to make one of these remote accessible. So let's say we want to create new share 2, the one from earlier, enabled. We can make sure we've got versions, so as changes happen, we can roll back the changes that have happened to files. You can even have a rotation policy where it will overwrite the oldest rotation. And there you go. We've now enabled this within shared Synology Drive Admin Console. But what does that mean? Well, the next thing you want to do is find your NAS on the Application Center from Synology. And on the Download Center, go to Desktop Utilities and find Synology Drive Client. Download either the Windows or Mac or Ubuntu version, depending on the NAS you are using, and then go ahead and download it. Once it's downloaded and you install the application, you'll be greeted with a window not dissimilar to this. This window here, let's bring Adobe back there. This window allows you to create a shared folder on your NAS. Now what this is this. On the left hand side of the screen, as you can see there, I've got all of my files and folders. Earlier on, we had those mapped drives, but also I've got a folder here specifically with an arrow and Synology Drive next to it. So within this application, do yourself a favor and go to click Create. From here, it will have another option here underneath that top one for another Synology NAS. Click the spyglass and it will scan your local area network for the available Synology NASs in your home or business environment. As you can see, it's found our 10GBE connected Synology. Click there. Then enter the login credentials for that NAS. Now, if you want to connect to this drive when you're outside of your local area network, you're going to have to enter the Quick Connect ID from Synology or the domain name that you used when creating remote access to this NAS. Once again, I strongly recommend that you check out my guide where I talked about how to set up the NAS for the first time, including how to create remote connectivity to your NAS over the internet. But let's skip that ad there because it's super annoying. If we go back into the Synology Drive client, I'll proceed with the 10GBE connection. Also choose if you want encryption, but bear in mind encryption will be slightly slower and only really applies to outside of the local area network. As you can see, it's asking how you want to connect to the device, whether you want to switch to Quick Connect or remote access or stick with local access. I'm going to say no for now, but you can add it later. Next, select the folder you want to synchronize with. As you can see, we added New Share 2 earlier to this range of drives. So I'm going to select multimedia and virtual images for a reason I'll explain later, but you can go ahead if you choose to select New Share True if you like. After that, select where on your local computer you want this to live. So as you can see, we've got all of those drives we've connected earlier, but for me, I'm going to select the D drive here, or no, the C drive, and then from there, I'm going to select the desktop. So I'm going to go to Users, I'm going to go to my local drive, I'm going to select Desktop, and within that desktop, I'm going to create where this is going to sync. Now, it's worth highlighting, if you put this tick box here, it will create a subfolder like this one. Let's go to it there. But if you want to go directly into that folder, then you remove the tick from that box. So once again, sorry for the lack of clarity. If you leave that option ticked, it will create this submenu here called Synology Drive. But if you uncheck that box, it will directly go into the files and folders you select. So for me, I'm going to leave that option on. Click OK, and then you can choose On Demand Sync. I would click yes, and I'll explain why that's important later. Finally, you can choose filters if you choose, where if you don't want that synced folder to synchronize everything, you can say what files and folders you don't want to synchronize. The same goes with file types, in case you don't want the big files or pointless files, as well as do you want the two files to remain permanently synchronized or only a one-way synchronization if you choose to. Come out there and click Done. Now Synology Drive is adding this new synchronized folder, and if we go back onto my Windows machine, we can see now a new drive has appeared, the DS723 Plus. If we select it, there is our folder, Multimedia and Virtual Images. Now, you can see the working bar there, because it is still live synchronizing as we speak. As we go in, we can have a look at the layout, but the other good thing to bear in mind are the little folders here. The little folders and the little clouds, these represent whether what you're seeing is an outline of the contents of the file or the full file. So for example, if we right click, we can see that although there is 7.48 gig of data on the NAS, there is 0 space being taken up on my local PC. The reason being that we're streaming that file on demand. Whereas if we go into it and I right click, I can choose, if I wish, to pin a local copy permanently, which means this file will always be on my local PC, get a link to share it with someone, or if I've had previous versions of that file, such as I've updated it over time, I can cycle through them. Now, if I was to watch one of these files, so say we watch this file here very briefly, disable the sound, it will download a local copy of that file. I'm not going to let it play because of licensing issues, but as you can see now, that file has got a tick next to it. So whereas all the other files had got the cloud or otherwise, this now has that tick. So this allows me now, if I right click the file, I can choose whether I want to now continue to pin that or free up space. If I pin it permanently, it receives a green tick. That means this file will always be on my local system, or if I choose, I can go ahead and free up the space. And now it's going to delete it, and then just like any other file, it's not going to take up any space. And it's that straightforward. Now, bear in mind that this methodology I've shown you now isn't going to be great if you want to edit files on this NAS. For example, if we try to add media, like we've done before, we can select this folder and we can go in. But because of file streaming and file pinning, we may see the files that are there, but it won't necessarily add them. The reason you include Synology Drive in your workflow is so you can have a centralized, synchronized team folder between many multiple video editors at once, all of which can access that same storage. I would recommend map drives or iSCSI drives for those of you that want to edit larger, denser videos. And of course, even though we're looking at an incredibly out-of-date version of Elements, There is still many other tools out there that will connect with the NAS system in all the ways I've described today. Just make sure that you get your storage right on day one, and make sure you use my list of guides to get it set up right the first time. And stay tuned soon for the Mac version of this video, in which Ed will guide you through how to connect over iSCSI with a Mac system to edit photos and video with your premium content creator applications. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Sorry it ran on a bit long, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything. And again, the Mac version will come soon. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you need help with your setup and this guide hasn't scratched that itch, use the free advice section link below over to NAS Compares, the big blue button on the right hand side of the screen, or utilize the Ask NAS Compares forum, where it's a free community forum and by me and Eddie and others. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Use the links in the description to buy anything you like that this video has helped you to decide upon, as we get a kickback and it helps us make more content. And apart from that, I will see you next time.